Have you ever felt exhausted even though no one did anything to you? No insults, no injuries, nothing serious happened, and yet there's a quiet chaos inside your head. The same voices repeating, "I'm not good enough. Everyone's getting ahead of me. Maybe I'll never make it." And the worst part is, you believe them. Most of the limits we face don't come from the outside world, but from an undisciplined mind. It's that subtle force shaping how we think, react, and choose every single day. Stoicism doesn't try to silence those negative voices. It teaches us to see them for what they are, just thoughts, not truth. When we learn to separate ourselves from the noise within, we begin to live as awakened beings with will, with choice, and with inner freedom. Now, let us begin the journey of mastering the mind. 1. The mind, a master of disguise. The human mind is a powerful tool, but also a master of deception. It can paint grand visions and push us beyond our limits. Yet it also knows how to whisper doubt, fear, and delay in sweet and subtle ways. Our greatest limits often don't come from the world or people around us, but from an inner form of self-limitation where the mind uses past experiences, unresolved emotions, or untested fears to sketch a distorted picture of who we are. When we fail to recognize this, we begin to react as if every thought we have is true, and that's when the mind starts to rule our lives instead of serving them. We often don't realize we're being controlled because the mind doesn't issue commands outright. It doesn't shout, "Stop," when you're about to do something meaningful. It simply whispers, "You're not ready. Maybe wait a little longer. Others are already doing better." Why bother? These whispers have no form, but carry incredible weight. You procrastinate and call it caution. You turn down opportunities and label it prudence. And you stand still while life moves on. In that silence, the mind has succeeded in keeping you safe, not because it wants to destroy you, but because it fears you might fail. Stoicism teaches that truth isn't found in thought, but in how we choose to face it. A thought holds no real power unless we believe in it. A voice in your head is only a theory until you let it become your compass. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Within you is a fortress no one can enter unless you open the gate from within." He wasn't talking about physical walls, but the faculty of discernment, the ability to know what's objective and what's delusion. When you begin to see your mind as a stream, sometimes clear, sometimes muddy, you stop drifting with it unconsciously. You observe it, you step back from it, and from that distance, you can choose how to respond. What makes the mind dangerous isn't its negativity, but its disguise. It can speak in your voice, echo your feelings, or invoke the most vivid memories to convince you of what's false. It can turn a minor worry into a tragedy, a glance into a judgment, a mistake into a life sentence. You don't have to believe everything you think. You only need to be awake enough to ask a simple question. Is this true? And from that question, an inner space begins to open. The mind was made to serve you, not rule you. But for that to happen, you must become its trainer every single day. A sharp sword must be sharpened, controlled, and wielded with intention. If not, it turns on the one who holds it. Every unexamined thought is a hidden blade. And every time you act without challenging your beliefs, you let that blade swing in the dark. So listen closely to the voice guiding you right now. Is it pushing you forward or holding you back? Is it telling the truth or echoing a fear? The mind can be your most loyal companion if trained by reason, but your most dangerous traitor if given authority without examination. Stoicism doesn't promise to silence every negative voice. It teaches you to discern what's real and what's merely an echo from a place you no longer live. You don't need to conquer your mind all at once. Just begin with one small act. Pause, observe, and ask. When you can do that, you are no longer a victim of thought, but its guide. And that is the first step in turning the mind from a deceiver into a steadfast ally on the path of conscious, intentional living. 2. Pause and look deeply into your thoughts. We live most of our lives inside a world no one else can see, the world of thought. And the paradox is this: it's the things no one sees that most powerfully shape what others see in us. Every action, decision, and reaction is driven by inner dialogue we rarely examine. A fleeting thought like, "I'm going to fail," can change the way you enter a room, how you answer a question, even how you live the next decade of your life. It all starts with a thought, and if you never stop to examine it, it will carry you far from who you truly are. What's tragic is that many people live their entire lives without once asking, "What am I thinking?" Not because they're not intelligent or aware, but because in a world that moves too fast, we get swept into the pace and forget that our own mind is the source from which everything else flows. Instead of questioning thoughts, we react to them. Instead of observing, we become entangled. And so we are led without even knowing it. Stoicism doesn't demand you suppress emotion or reject negative thoughts, but asks something more fundamental: observe. When you observe your thoughts, you create a small gap between what you're thinking and who you are. In that gap, freedom begins. You no longer have to follow the mind's whispers. You can look at them, question them, and decide whether to act or not. That is the first step toward transformation. Many people assume thoughts are truth, but in reality, they're just echoes of what we've seen, heard, experienced, or feared. They're not reality, just reactions, and reactions shouldn't dictate direction. Epictetus once said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them." This doesn't dismiss hardship, but highlights a deeper truth. It's not the situation, but our thought about it that births either suffering or freedom. Change your thinking, and you change your life. Looking into your thoughts isn't just an exercise in logic, it's an act of courage. Because in doing so, you'll discover beliefs you've carried since childhood. Ideas about worth, success, failure, or love that were never truly yours. They came from the environment, from others, from moments when you were no longer the person you are now, and yet you still carry them as if they were laws. That's what keeps you stuck. To look at a thought with curiosity is to liberate yourself. When you hear, "I'm not good enough," pause and ask, "Is there any proof of that?" When you tell yourself, "I'm bound to fail," ask again, "Based on what? Has this really happened before? And if it has, what did I learn from it?" Every question unlocks a link in the mental chains you've worn too long. You don't overcome negative thinking through denial, but through truth. And truth doesn't shout, but it dissolves illusions with quiet power. Stoicism values self-inquiry, the ability to turn inward and clarify what's unfolding. Mastering the mind doesn't begin with massive change, but in the moment you pause, become still, and choose honesty. Honesty about what you're thinking, honesty about what you're believing, and reason enough to ask, "Is this real?" When you examine your thoughts instead of following them, you stop living by habit. You begin to live with awareness, and that is the first door to inner freedom. 3. The survival instinct has its limits. There is an invisible force that most of us have felt, especially right before doing something important. A hesitation, a seemingly reasonable delay that is, in truth, Fear in disguise. Every time you're about to step outside your comfort zone, the mind sends out a signal. It doesn't shout, but it's clear enough to make you pull back. It whispers, "Wait, this could be risky." And if you don't recognize what's truly happening, you'll mistake safety for stagnation. The survival instinct was born to protect humans from danger. In the primitive age, it helped our ancestors escape predators, avoid accidents, and survive harsh nature. But in our modern world, where most threats are no longer physical but psychological and social, this instinct hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed form. Instead of protecting you from lions, it shields you from judgment. Instead of alerting you to traps in the forest, it warns you about possible failure. And in that confusion, you unconsciously allow your mind to suffocate your potential. The mind doesn't distinguish between real danger and imagined fear. A crucial email, a meeting, a necessary decision, all can be flagged as threats by the brain if they challenge your familiar territory. You feel anxious, uneasy, and start wondering if you should even proceed. But without awareness, you'll take those feelings as signs to stop when they're merely signals that you're approaching growth. This is the moment when reason must intervene. Stoicism does not deny the survival instinct. It teaches us to observe it and redefine its boundaries. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If something is within the capacity of a human being and aligns with human nature, then there's no reason to think we can't do it." These words are not about delusions of grandeur, but a reminder of a forgotten truth. The survival instinct is part of your operating system, not your entire being. You were not born just to survive. You were born to grow, to evolve, to live meaningfully. When you let the survival instinct guide all your decisions, you no longer live by reason, you react like a machine. Every time you delay out of fear, avoid because of worry, or choose ease over challenge, you reinforce the belief that you are weak. And the mind, with its fast learning mechanisms, records that. It concludes that avoidance is safe, and you repeat that cycle over and over until you're conscious enough to break it. That's why action is the only weapon that reclaims your rightful place over the mind. You don't need to eliminate fear entirely, nor wait until you feel fully confident. You just need to act even one small step to send a new signal to the brain. I am no longer ruled by fear. And over time, with enough consistency, the mind will relearn to serve rather than dominate. The survival instinct is valuable when it alerts you to real danger, but it becomes a barrier when you let it decide in place of your reasoned choice. Maturity is knowing when to listen and when to move through it. Stoicism doesn't teach you to suppress emotion, it teaches you to use reason to make decisions, regardless of what emotion says. And from there, you begin to live as a free human being, no longer driven by unconscious reactions, but guided by deliberate will. 4. The habit of the awake. Observe. Question. Act. No one can stop thoughts from arising in the mind. They come like the wind, gentle, sudden, and without permission. But you always have the power to decide what to do with them. And in that very choice, your life begins to split. Either you let your mind run the show by inertia, or you learn to observe it, challenge it, and act based on what you choose, not what you feel. This is the foundational habit of the awake, those who no longer live by reaction, but by awareness. The first step is observation. Observation isn't control, nor suppression. It is a state of alertness where you look into what's happening in your mind without immediately believing it or running from it. When a negative thought arises, those without the habit of observation will instantly identify with it. They don't think, "I'm having a thought about failure." They think, "I will fail." But those trained in observation respond differently. They look at the thought as an object. They might even say silently, here is a thought trying to plant doubt. And by merely recognizing it, the thought's power is already cut in half. Still, observation alone is not enough. If you simply watch the stream of thoughts without engaging, you'll eventually get swept away. That's why the second step is questioning. This is when you use reason to dialogue with yourself. When a thought arises, you ask, "Is this true? What proof do I have for this belief? Am I exaggerating? Does this thought help me or paralyze me?" These questions don't aim to invalidate your emotions, but to help you distinguish between what's real and what's just a temporary reaction. Questioning is how you reclaim sovereignty over your inner dialogue. You're no longer passively listening to the mind, you become the one who chooses what's worth believing and what should be dismissed. The final step is action. This is when you move from thought into reality. Once you've observed and questioned, don't stop at understanding. You must step out of the mental spiral with a concrete act. It could be writing down what you've been putting off, doing the task you've been avoiding, or simply sitting quietly instead of running to distractions. Action teaches your mind a new truth. You're no longer ruled by emotion or doubt, you're in command. And when repeated, day after day, this becomes a consistent signal to the brain. I'm not the same fearful person I once was. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Get up if you can. If not, lie there and be aware that you could get up." Hidden in this sentence is an emphasis on will forged through action, not passive reflection. The awake don't wait to feel ready. They don't wait for the fear to vanish. They act in the midst of doubt, in the presence of emotion, because they know that action is the only way to restore inner order. When you train yourself in the habit of observing thought, questioning it with reason, and acting with intention, you stop living like a leaf drifting in the wind. You become the one steering your own ship, no matter how fierce the currents. You don't need to silence every storm inside you, only need to know you're not blinded by it. And when that becomes a habit, you no longer have to force yourself to control the mind. You simply live with awareness clear enough to see, rational enough to question, and strong enough to move forward. 5. Discipline is not punishment, it's liberation. When people hear the word discipline, most imagine something harsh, rigid, and forced. It conjures images of restriction, sacrifice, even asceticism. But that's a common misconception. Discipline is not a sentence for the unmotivated, nor is it a chain of prohibitions to control human behavior. Discipline, in the spirit of Stoic philosophers, is a higher form of freedom, a release from inner slavery, where one is no longer led by impulse or blind desire, but knows how to lead oneself. Discipline doesn't restrict you. It restricts your distractions. It doesn't force you to give up life, but helps you abandon the habits that prevent you from living by your values. Discipline is the boundary between a life of purpose and a life adrift. It doesn't take away your freedom, it protects it from external forces. A person without discipline is easily swayed by temptation, manipulated by circumstances, and enslaved by delay. But one who lives with discipline knows exactly what needs to be done, regardless of how they feel. They don't live by mood, they live by commitment. In Stoic philosophy, discipline is inseparable from virtue. It is not the mechanical repetition of habits, but a means to cultivate character. Because only when you're disciplined enough not to react instantly to discomfort can you act with reason. Only when you're disciplined enough to maintain a good habit in silence can you understand what endurance truly means. And only when you're disciplined enough to listen to yourself instead of chasing every noise around you, can you truly live with awareness. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You are not compelled to form an opinion. Keep your inner peace as a fortress." And that stillness is only attainable through discipline. Discipline in thought, in reaction, and in choice. A person lacking discipline will always wait for inspiration before starting, while a disciplined person begins even without it. They understand that action doesn't always follow positive emotion. Sometimes, positive emotion is the result of resolute action. Discipline doesn't remove your softness. On the contrary, it creates space for you to be soft at the right time, in the right way, without being weak in adversity. It doesn't turn you into a machine, but frees you from inner chaos. When discipline becomes part of your daily life, you'll begin to see that the small things you once overlooked, like time, speech, behavior, are the very foundation of greater things. And through consistency, self-respect is built not from promises, but from steady practice. Discipline doesn't mean you'll never make mistakes. It means you don't let your mistakes define you. It doesn't force you to become someone else. It helps you become a more rightful version of yourself. Every disciplined act is a quiet declaration. I am not led by fear, temptation, or old habits. And slowly, through small but consistent choices, you rebuild trust with yourself, a trust that no one else can give you. So, discipline is not punishment, it is the path through chaos toward clarity. Not an external force, but a deep promise you make to yourself. A promise that says, I will act by what's right, not what's easy. And in a world that constantly changes, keeping that promise is the true expression of freedom. 6. Your environment nurtures or poisons the mind. No one wakes up in the morning with a completely empty mind. The moment you open your eyes, the world begins to pour in. An alarm ringing, social media notifications, headlines, someone's voice nearby, or even the quiet whispers from within. And just like that, your mind starts shaping the tone of your entire day, either calm and aware, or quietly chaotic. But the truth is, most of the forces shaping that state don't come from within you. They come from the environment you place yourself in each day. The mind, no matter how strong, is like soil it grows. What is planted? If you regularly expose it to agitating, negative, or meaningless content, you can't expect peace, clarity, or depth to grow within. A person may live with noble ideals and a strong will to improve, but if constantly surrounded by complaints, sarcasm, or toxic habits from others, their mind will slowly erode. Not because they are weak, but because no one can withstand a constant stream of polluted energy without conscious protection. Stoicism is not only about controlling your personal thoughts, it's the art of filtering what you allow into your mind. Epictetus once said, "We cannot control everything that happens around us, but we can control what we accept and how we respond." That seemingly simple line is a profound principle for building a resilient mind. Every small choice, what you read, what you listen to, who you talk to, where you spend time, contributes to building or breaking the quality of your inner life. Environment isn't just physical space. It's the informational space you create daily. If you spend hours scrolling through meaningless content, endless arguments, or images that make you compare and doubt yourself, you are poisoning your capacity to think and feel clearly. But if you choose to read thoughtful books, engage in uplifting conversations, and seek stillness to turn inward, you are nurturing a mind that can think, listen, and stay steady amid the noise. Each day is a series of subtle choices, and the environment you engage with most will shape who you become. The mind is not immune to influence. It learns how to react, feel, and interpret the world based on what you put in front of it. That's why people committed to growth don't just change their internal habits, they rigorously change their external environment. They understand that for the mind to be honed like a sharp blade, it cannot be soaked in a swamp of emotional and mental pollution. Inner freedom doesn't begin with where you live. It begins with how you choose what belongs in your life. If you let the environment dictate your thoughts, then you are like a sailboat drifting wherever the wind blows. But if you deliberately choose your sources of influence, a book, a conversation, a moment of silence, you are laying a strong foundation for self-mastery. And from that point, you will no longer fear the world's chaos, because you've already decided what's allowed to exist within your world. 7. The habit of intentional response. In every moment of life, we are not only facing circumstances, we are facing how we choose to respond to them. The difference between someone ruled by emotion and someone who governs their life lies not in what they experience, but in how they choose to respond. A response is the intersection between external impact and the inner world, where awareness can either step in or be entirely absent. And in Stoic philosophy, response is not an unconscious outburst, it is a skill to be cultivated. An intentional response, not instinctual, but rational. We often confuse action with reaction. Action is the result of reflection. Reaction is driven by emotional impulse. An insult may spark instant anger, rejection may lead to self-doubt, and a small failure may push you to quit. These reactions feel natural because they arrive fast and hit hard, but speed does not equal truth. And emotions, no matter how real, do not always make good guides. Stoicism doesn't teach you to suppress emotion. It teaches you to create a brief pause just long enough for awareness to arise. Between the trigger and your response lies a moment. It may be fleeting, but it's enough for you to ask, what am I reacting to? By slowing down, even briefly, you give yourself the power to choose. And when that choice comes from reason instead of reflex, you're no longer being shaped by the world, you begin to shape your own attitude toward it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Keep your mind calm before all events, for it is the mind, not the event, that causes disturbance." This line reminds us that turmoil is not in the situation, but in our interpretation and reaction to it. When you respond with intention, you don't deny what's happening, but you refuse to let emotion define your worth. You don't rage at injustice, you pause to consider whether the act truly threatens your integrity. You don't rush to defend against misunderstanding, you take the time to ask whether it requires explanation or merely offers a chance to practice equanimity. Intentional response is not a flash of clarity, it's a habit forged through hundreds of small daily choices. It begins with recognizing the emotion, questioning the motive behind your reaction, and ends with an action aligned with your values. Every time you succeed in doing this, you don't just protect your inner peace, you reinforce your self-respect. Because when your actions are no longer driven by others, you are no longer dependent on them to define who you are. A spiritually mature person doesn't respond instantly to the world. They step back, look inward, and choose a response that honors what they believe. They don't respond to win, to prove, or to perform. They respond to preserve inner integrity. In a world where people easily get angry, argue, and accuse, the one who knows how to respond intentionally holds real power. Not because they are stronger, but because they are freer. And the greatest freedom is not letting others decide your mood, your behavior, or your worth. Training intentional response doesn't require you to be a philosopher or a hermit. It only requires daily awareness. Every time someone frustrates you, every time you face failure, every time your heart stirs with emotion, Remember that you have the right to pause. You have the power to choose. And each time you do, you move closer to a life where you lead, not follow. That is the path every Stoic must walk. The path of conscious response, of inner resilience, and of true freedom. 8. Choose to sharpen your sword daily. The human mind is a double-edged sword, one side sharp and guiding us toward self-mastery, the other quietly slicing into our confidence and pulling us into cycles of doubt. But what matters is not how dangerous or powerful the sword is. What matters is who's holding it. If you let the mind operate through reaction, fear, or influence from chaotic environments and unaware habits, the sword will eventually turn inward and harm you. But if you know how to train it, how to observe, question, and act intentionally, then that same sword becomes a firm tool to help you overcome life's resistance. Training the mind is not a one-time act. It's a repeated practice embedded in the smallest daily choices. It's when you choose not to chase outer noise but examine your inner voice instead. It's when you choose to sit with your emotions instead of immediately acting on them. It's when you step out of your comfort zone, not to prove anything, but because you know growth only happens when you surpass familiar fears. Each time you make such a choice, you're not just sharpening the sword, you're learning to wield it with calm, discipline, and precision. Stoicism never promises life will be easy once you master your mind. But it assures you that a trained mind cannot be swept away by any circumstance. You may fail, lose, or be hurt, but you won't lose yourself. Because you no longer live as a victim of circumstance or emotion, but as someone deliberate, someone who knows their limits, their strength, and takes responsibility for every act. This isn't perfection, it's maturity. No one is born with a steadfast mind. Resilience is forged, and like any artisan, you'll need patience, time, and a non-negotiable commitment to yourself. That commitment means revisiting your thoughts daily, refining your reactions, and taking one more step forward even when no one sees it. Through repetition, you rewrite the way the mind operates, expand your inner freedom, and reshape who you're becoming. So don't expect a sudden grand transformation. Begin with a small choice, a single intentional action, a thought questioned, a quiet response. Each such choice is a moment you reclaim your sword, wipe the dust from its edge, and sharpen it again. Choose to hone that sword every day, because when you learn to master your mind, you're not only protecting yourself, you're walking through life with an unshakable steadiness. And in a world of endless turmoil, that is the most powerful strength you can possess. What keeps me faithful to Stoic philosophy is not the elegant words found in books, but the clarity, practicality, and liberating force it brings to even the smallest actions in daily life. When I understood that I didn't have to believe every thought that entered my mind, I began to slow down and become more aware of my automatic reactions. From that point on, I no longer felt trapped in my own mind, nor did I let fleeting emotions dictate important decisions. I learned that freedom is not doing whatever I want, but having the ability to choose what is right, even when it's difficult. For me, discipline is no longer a burden, but a deep commitment to myself. And with each day, each moment that I choose to look inward, I take another step toward strengthening my inner power. That power doesn't come from force, but from clarity. I am the one ultimately responsible for how I live. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next content. Remember, strength doesn't come from controlling the world. It comes from your ability to guide yourself, even in the quietest moments. I'll see you in the next video.